Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I'm sure a couple additional people will be joining us, but a lot of what I will be talking about is become very familiar to a lot of you. I'm Jody Bechtel. I'm the Deputy Director for Clark County's Department of Environment and Sustainability, and we are here to discuss rules under consideration for the state implementation plan requirements for moderate non-attainment of the 2015 Ozone National Ambient Air Quality Standard. And please note that this meeting is going to be recorded, so it will be able to be posted later for folks, but just wanted to let everyone know that you are being recorded and any comments you make. So our department, through the Division of Air Quality, or DAQ, serves as the Air Pollution Control Agency for Clark County. The contacts you see on your screen are those involved in this ozone attainment SIP, State Implementation Plan, or SIP, and rule development process. We've had several stakeholder meetings so far. Our very first stakeholder meeting on this new attainment designation was held on January 12th. And this is one of 7 workshops. I think this is our 6th workshop, so the penultimate workshop to review particular regulations we are looking to promulgate. These meetings are being recorded, as I mentioned, and they can be found on, found on our website. I'll place a link to the website in the chat, but it's noted here on the bottom of your screen, where you can find the recordings and these presentations and other information. So we will have time during this meeting to discuss some of your questions, address any questions and comments you may have. We're asking that you please hold any verbal questions until the end. You can type them into the chat as they come to mind, and feel free to raise your hand. And then at the end of the presentation, we will unmute folks and be able to have a discussion. If we don't get to every question, we will do our very best to get answers back to you. So in our January meeting, we did kind of a detailed review of our ozone situation that we're facing here in Clark County. And I'm not going to get into a lot of detail in these introductory slides, but I encourage you to watch the video or review that complete presentation for the specifics. So right now, Clark County, we used to be in marginal non-attainment for ozone, and the current standard for ozone is 70 parts per billion. With that standard, we have been recently bumped up to moderate non-attainment, which is spurring these actions. Excuse me. So this graph shows kind of the ozone design value trends in hydrographic area 212, or the Las Vegas Valley, over the last 20 or so years. And as you can see, we've been trending downward in ozone, which is great. But since the early 2000s, we've kind of stalled out in this mid to low 70 parts per billion. And with the standard at 70 parts per billion, we're just above it, and we need to get these numbers under the 70 parts per billion to get into attainment. The bump up in classification requires that we achieve attainment of the 70 parts per billion standard by August 3rd of 2024. We must establish emission control requirements in a state implementation plan, or SIP, including rule development on reasonably available control technology. We are required to do a 15% rate of progress requirement, and we are required to put some contingency measures in place to ensure we are moving towards attainment. Under EPA's final bump up rule, EPA requires DAQ to submit that SIP by a retroactive date of January 1st, 2023. Obviously, because we are working under a deadline that has already passed, we need to get controls in place as soon as possible, or we are at risk that the EPA could start a sanctions clock that could lead to loss of federal highway funds and other penalties, and could also allow EPA to impose a federal implementation plan to implement control requirements and get the area into attainment. So we've identified these sources that you see, these source categories as needing action and rulemaking. These actions and those on the next slide are the rules we are discussing in this series of 7 workshops. We are additionally needing to show a 50% ROP, or rate of progress, which requires us to reduce our volatile organic compound emissions over our baseline by 15%. And that reduction is independent of emissions that are necessary to achieve attainment. As well, we're required to have contingency measure rules on the books, and that those would be triggered if we haven't reached attainment by the August 2024 date. So here on this screen, showing the actions that we're considering for that 15% ROP, volatile organic compound reduction, and contingency measures. So some of these you'll notice overlap with the CTG RACT actions or rules on the previous slide, and those overlaps will be discussed in these workshops. So we expect and hope not to have to implement all of these actions, and we will know for certain which ones are for certain needed once our attainment model is completed and run, which we expect to have completed sometime toward the end of April. So we're discussing all of these with you as if we were proceeding with them because of the tight schedule that we are under. So this table just identifies the statutory timelines that we're working under. Again, EPA Region 9 is aware that the SIP submission deadline that they've set is in the past and therefore unrealistic. And DAQ is working closely with EPA to show good faith progress to develop the SIP and adopt related regulations as expeditiously as possible in 2023. We will review the expected rulemaking timelines in each of these workshops, which is based on an attempt to get these rules in place as soon as possible in the summer months of our ozone season, which is when we have the most exceedances. And with that, I will turn it over to Lynn Hutchinson, who will go over some of the asphalt rules that we're considering. Thank you. Lynn, I see your screen, but you're muted.
How's that?
There we go.
Okay, great. So as Joni introduced me, my name is Lynn Hutchinson. I work for RTP Environmental Associates, which is a consulting firm, and we are working with Clark County to help develop their SIP plan that will be submitted to EPA. So we are going to talk about EPA's recommendations for RACT for the cutback asphalt industry. EPA published their Control Techniques Guideline Document, or CTG, back in 1977. So it's pretty old at this point, and they have not updated it since. At the end of this webinar, I will place a link to that document in the chat feature for the webinar. So if you want to take a look at the document, you can do that. So I think most of us are probably familiar with the concept of asphalt, but there are two types of asphalts. They include cutback asphalt and emulsified asphalt. Cutback asphalt is defined as a liquid petroleum product that is prepared by mixing asphalt cement with a diluent, typically about 25 to 45% petroleum distillates, or at least that's what it was back when EPA did the 1977 CTG. The ratios may be different today. Emulsified asphalts is the mixture of asphalt cement, a highly viscous material that is a byproduct also of petroleum refinery, and petroleum distillates. Emulsified asphalts may contain up to 12% organic solvents by volume. EPA's 1977 CTG includes recommended RACT requirements only for cutback asphalt, not emulsified asphalts. Again, most people are probably familiar with the uses, although there are a host of them that you may not think of. It's used in highway paving, in sealing the highway, repairing surfaces of runways at the airports. Driveways are also in some parts of the country made of asphalt. Here in North Carolina, they use cement down here, but when I lived in the north, our driveways were asphalt. And you may also have walking paths that are made of asphalt. The asphalt is used in nearly all paving applications, and it's usually applied as a hot preparation that's sprayed directly on the road surface, although cold preparations can be used in the wintertime to patch road holes. Emissions from this source category pretty much occur due to evaporation of VOCs from the road surfaces during application of the material at the job site. EPA's CTG RACT recommendation was to substitute emulsifiers and water for the petroleum distillate solvents in cutback asphalt. In other words, they recommended that people shift from the use of cutback asphalts to more emulsified asphalts. In 1978, EPA estimated that this substitution would result in nearly 100% emission reduction from cutback asphalts because it assumed a low VOC content emulsifier would be used in the formulation. As we look at Clark County's 2017 emissions inventory, which will be the base year for computation of emission reductions under the 2015 ozone NAAQS attainment plan, we see that Clark County continues to report emissions for both cutback asphalts and emulsified asphalts in the inventory. And as Jody explained, we are looking for every opportunity to meet our reasonable rate of progress requirements and bring the area into attainment. And so with that in mind, as we move forward to consider what the RACT rule might look like for cutback asphalt, the question arises as to whether that regulation should also include some limitations for emulsified asphalt. Well, let me be clear, DAQ has not made any decisions to regulate emulsified asphalt as part of this RACT effort, but the discussion is on the table because we estimate that certain substitutions could yield as much as 3 tons per year or 3 tons per day in emission reductions. So before we get into the specifics well, I already talked about the CTG requirements, but I wanted to note that there is a rule that applies in Clark County that affects cutback asphalt. This is former Rule 60.4. It's currently approved into Clark County State Implementation Plan. I called it a former rule, however, because in 2011, the county commissioners removed the Part 60 regulations from the Clark County's regulations. This means that although the rule is in the state implementation plan and can be enforced by EPA, this rule is not currently being enforced by DAQ. In looking at the 2017 inventory, therefore, DAQ is assuming that those emissions from cutback asphalt that are in the inventory represent uncontrolled emissions. One option for moving forward with satisfying the RACT requirements for the cutback asphalt industry is to reinstate former Rule 60.4. This rule aligns with EPA's CTG recommendation to preclude the use of cutback asphalts in favor of emulsified asphalts. While this remains an option for consideration, there are several factors that could make this approach less desirable. One, we are uncertain if EPA would allow any emission reduction credit in the attainment demonstration for a rule that is supposed to already be complying. Also, the rule, as I'm going to talk about in a little bit more detail, regulates slow cure asphalts, but doesn't actually have a definition for slow cure asphalts. It also doesn't have any kind of enforcement, practical enforceability elements such as record keeping or test methods to verify use of particular asphalts. So what does the rule require? The rule, oh, I think I skipped over the definitions. I must have skipped ahead. So the rule contains definitions for cutback asphalt. They are kind of generic nature, it also includes definitions for the medium curing asphalts, which is a cutback asphalt, generally using kerosene as the solvent, and a rapid cure asphalt, which is a highly volatile gasoline or naphtha-based solvent asphalt. And it also, as I said, regulates slow cure asphalts, but does not have a definition for it. In the regulation, Rule 60.4 requires that slow cure and medium cure asphalts, well, basically, and rapid cure asphalts not be used in the Las Vegas Valley, except in prime coats on lightly traveled gravel surfaces or surfaces with temporary traffic. You can use them in long period storage for stockpiling of patching mixes for use in paving maintenance. And you can also use the cutback asphalts when the temperature is forecasted not to exceed 50 degrees Fahrenheit for a 24-hour period. And this was generally, that temperature requirement was generally in there to capture not using these asphalts during the ozone season, but allowing them outside the ozone season. So in the materials distributed for today's workshop, DAQ included 3 state or local air pollution agency rules. They include Louisiana, Michigan, and San Diego County, California. Louisiana's rule is very similar to the existing Clark County rule in the basics of the rule, except it regulates both cutback asphalt and emulsified asphalts. The rule prohibits use of cutback and emulsified asphalts except as approved by Louisiana Department of Air Quality for specific types of uses, which we're going to go over on the next slide. Louisiana's rule includes several exemptions that again closely resemble those in DAQ's former Rule 60.4, including long life stockpile storage, use above the 50-degree Fahrenheit, below the 50-degree Fahrenheit, use as a penetrating prime coat. But they also say that if you can demonstrate that the asphalt isn't going to have VOC emissions, that's another exemption from the rule. Under the Louisiana rule, the permissible uses are only relative to emulsified asphalts. The rule sets maximum VOC content limits for the materials that range between 3% and 14%, depending on the type and use of the asphalt. For example, there's a 3% by weight VOC content limit on seal coats and a 14% VOC content requirement by weight for mixing with dense graded aggregate. Louisiana specifies that the VOC content of these asphalt materials needs to be verified by ASTM method D-244. Another rule that we distributed for discussion purposes was the San Diego County asphalt rule. Unlike the DAQ Rule 60.4 and the Louisiana rule, San Diego County does not completely prohibit the use of cutback asphalts during times of the year. Instead, it sets a VOC content limit of no greater than 0.5% by volume VOC. It also regulates emulsified asphalts and prohibits the sale and use for paving, construction or parking lots, driveways, streets, or highway roads. And it requires the use of ASTM methods D402-76, D244-89, D4427-85 to verify the VOC contents of the asphalts. In addition, the San Diego rule includes record-keeping requirements in that you must retain MSDS or material safety data sheets or manufacturer data sheets to show the content of the VOC in the asphalts. The San Diego County rule does include some additional exemptions. First, you are allowed to manufacture and sell non-compliant asphalts in the county if they were made to be shipped outside the county, made to be shipped and used outside the county. It also does not apply to the use of asphalt in connection with dwelling structures for 4 families or less. So driveways probably would fall into that classification where asphalt could be used for driveways. The final rule in the packet of materials distributed was the Michigan asphalt rule. Michigan applies a uniform VOC content limit for asphalt and cutback asphalt, which is a VOC content limit of 3% or less for both formulations. Michigan allows both ASTM and what's called AASHTO methods to verify the compliant limits with the VOC content limits in the rules. The AASHTO stands for the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. So if we compare these rules, basically the Louisiana rule starts off similar to the existing 60.4 rule, but it does include requirements for emulsions. The Louisiana rule also appears to be less rigorous and provide more flexibility with respect to those emulsions than the Michigan and San Diego County rules. The Michigan rule and San Diego County rules are similar, but San Diego County would always allow use of cutback asphalts, meeting its VOC content limits, where Michigan would restrict use of both emulsified and cutback asphalts using a uniform VOC content limit that applies during the ozone season, or similar to Clark County's, has to be below 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Finally, one observation I made looking at these rules is that the test methods cited in each of the rules are different. So that raises a number of questions for discussion that we're hoping to get feedback from interested stakeholders. First, should DAQ simply readopt Rule 60.4 to meet the RACT CTG requirements? If so, should DAQ make any minor changes to that rule to improve implementation, such as adding a definition for slow cured asphalt, or make any other changes that might be appropriate? If DAQ should not readopt 60.4, should it adopt either the 0.5% or 3% VOC content limits on cutback or emulsified asphalts, as found in the other rules? Additional emission reductions are possible by adopting the emulsified asphalt provisions. These additional emission reductions, as I mentioned earlier, might be necessary or desirable to meet rate of progress requirements or to hold as a contingency measure in the state implementation plan. A contingency measure comes into play if, for example, the county fails to meet its attainment date in August of 2024. If the county does not reach attainment by that date, then EPA requires that there's additional rules that go into effect to bring emission reductions and hopefully bring the area into attainment in the following years. So one option that DAQ is considering is potentially reserving emulsified asphalt regulations for these contingency measure parts of the SIP. If DAQ does move forward with regulation of emulsified asphalts, either as part of this RACT effort, the ROP requirement, or the contingency measures, we are certainly interested in feedback on which of the rules that we went over today, or maybe an entirely different state rule, may be most appropriate for DAQ to model. I had some additional questions specifically on the San Diego County rule. The test methods section refers only to cutback asphalts to meet both the cutback asphalt and cross-referencing to the emulsified asphalt limits. I really couldn't understand why they would do that, and I did not have a chance to call San Diego County and ask them, but perhaps people in the know understand why the term cutback asphalt was used in describing the test methods. And so if anyone has any information on that, we'd love to hear it. In comparison to San Diego County, Michigan refers to different ATSM measures and also allows the AASHTO methods, as I explained, while Louisiana allows the use of only one ASTM method. We're interested in hearing on which one of these test methods are best used to determine the VOC content of cutback and emulsified asphalts, and which DAQ should adopt into a rule should it move in the direction of adding these kinds of requirements to its cutback asphalt regulation. We'd also like to know whether DAQ should continue to use the 50-degree Fahrenheit temperature specification for restrictions related to cutback asphalt and/or emulsified asphalts, regardless of which rule that DAQ ultimately adopts. Are there VOC content restrictions that really should be applying year-round, or should the restrictions not apply during the non-ozone season? Or additionally, we would like feedback on whether the San Diego County exemptions for those driveways and shipping outside the county are things that should be included in DAQ's rule. And on one last note, we did look across a number of other states and compiled this chart together on what other states are requiring with respect to emulsified asphalts. I'm not going to go over this chart in detail, but as you prepare your comments, you might want to take a look at this and take a look at these other state rules. We're seeing a general trend here that 3% VOC by weight seems to be a common element in many of the state regulations, and we're just pointing that out as an observation. So with that, I'm going to end the technical portion of the webinar and turn this back over to Araceli.
Hi, all. I wanted to allow an opportunity for questions. Feel free to post them in the chat or raise your hand and I can go ahead and enable your microphone. I'll give a few more seconds. I'm not seeing any activity. Well, it appears nobody has any questions or comments to make at this time. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this discussion, and I have a few slides, closing slides to share with you. Bear with me one moment, please. Okay, can you see what's on my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, the first thing is the rulemaking timeline. And as we discussed earlier, given the deadlines the EPA has placed on us, we are adopting a fast-paced schedule for implementing these rules. We need to adopt them so that they will produce emission reductions in the ozone season of 2023, which is this summer. We are aiming to implement the rules no sooner than July 4th. We will consider all comments received today and any written comments we receive by March 1st, if we are to follow this July 4th scenario. And also that would involve a proposed rule being released for public notice on April 9th, closing on May 9th, and then it would go to the Board of County Commissioners for adoption on June 20th, with an effective date 14 days later on July 4th. The next steps, this basically restates what I just said on the previous slide, but I wanted to add that those who have registered for our distribution list for the respective control measures that we are considering, you will receive updates on the developments of these rules, but you can also follow the development of this process on the link here in this on this slide. And I will post a link. I believe we've posted a link in the chat. If not, I will. And that way you can have that information. And this presentation will also be uploaded to this website. And finally, the Division of Air Quality would like to continue to engage both industry and interested parties in the development of our attainment SIP. Questions can be directed to any of the contacts on this list right here. And if we can't answer your question directly, we can get you in contact with the person who can. And again, if you wish to receive notices on the plan developments and want to be added to our distribution list, please contact Alejandro Nunez. His information is on this slide.